Welcome to Inside IR, a podcast series by Herbert Smith Freehills that explores the latest developments in the Australian industrial relations landscape.
Hello and welcome to Inside IR, the Australian Industrial Relations podcast, the series that arms HR, IR and legal professionals with the latest industrial relations thinking. My name is Natalie Gaspar and I'm delighted to introduce my colleague, excellent Senior Associate Adam Ray to the couch. Welcome, Adam.
Thanks very much. It's good to be here.
We are joining you today. We, in this episode, are delving into all things generative AI.
Indeed.
And the impact on IR and bargaining more generally. So I collared a young person to actually get a definition of what AI is and what it will do to impact workplaces. So look, put simply, generative AI is the ability for a machine or a computer system to perform tasks that would otherwise normally require human input. So that as a phenomenon is not new, is it, Adam? For as long as we've been doing productive work as employees since the industrial age, I suppose, there has been the assistance of machine technologies to assist. But what is different with the latest round of generative AI is the ability to do what humans would do in terms of learning, reasoning and making decisions. So the impact on that, particularly with respect to those non-routine tasks, is the generation of content rather than just merely describing something that's already in place or reinterpreting data that's already been. So that being the case, the impact of these technologies on fields of pursuit where employees are involved continues to evolve, and it is impacting industries that previously we haven't seen before. So as I said, we're well versed as a country into dealing with the impact of technologies in factories and making widgets and those sorts of spheres. But for the first time now, we're dealing with these sorts of things where human input is required, creative endeavour. So anything that requires writing, quite frankly, and there's a whole range of industries that might be impacted in relation to this space. And when thinking about these things, one always looks to Hollywood, of course, and you might recall in the press relatively recently, in the last 6 months or so, there was a very robust debate between the writers and the Hollywood Writers Guild and the impact of the use of generative AI technologies in script writing. And indeed, that resulted in a strike for those writers across many of our favourite programs for many months. And it culminated with an agreement as to the impact of and use of Gen AI in writing and scripts in those industries and the use of consultation in that space. So look, many of you listening are possibly like me on this journey, trying to figure out what it means and how you can use AI in your day-to-day tasks. I think one thing that we read from the research and the data is that it is going to have a really significant impact on jobs and markets across the world and in Australia. So against that long-winded backdrop, Adam, what are we seeing in terms of this from the union movement and how Australian unions are responding to the impact and the spectre of AI?
Yeah, sure, Nat. And look, such an interesting topic and really stoked that I was invited to be on the episode. Also feeling a little bit out of depth because I'm still grappling with these sorts of things. But yeah, look, on the union front, I think perhaps we'll start with the ACTU.
Yeah.
They had their 3-yearly conference in June this year. And out of that came a formal policy they ratified on AI specifically, which gives a bit of an indication of where they are going as a peak body and where some of the individual unions might go. Look, generally, they acknowledge all the opportunity in AI, but perhaps unsurprisingly, they want workers to be protected, and they've made very clear that unions are going to act, including in the bargaining space, to address the perceived risks of AI and to ensure the benefits that businesses might get from using AI are shared with workers. A few specific points coming out of that policy, which might be worth touching on. Congress have stated that unions want genuine consultation provisions in agreements, specifically dealing with AI. They want transparency on how businesses are using AI. That's a big point that came from the policy. They want businesses and AI developers, interestingly, to be liable for decision making. And they've specifically pointed out that they want accessorial liability provisions strengthened. They don't want liability to be escaped, that they want either the developer or the business or both to be on the hook for where AI is used. They've also called out privacy, and specifically looking for privacy provisions to be added to modern awards dealing with things like surveillance, which AI is already being used for. They're calling out, they're asking for restrictions on bargaining to be removed. They haven't been explicit about that, but I guess my take on that would be that they're sort of suggesting a widening of the concept of permitted matters under the Fair Work Act, so that unions and businesses can bargain on matters relating to AI. So quite interesting to see where that one goes. A couple of other ones to call out, perhaps. They're asking for, or they said they'll be seeking, more favourable redundancy and redeployment provisions in the bargaining process. They want safety laws to be clearer, and interestingly, they want responsibilities to be on not only PCBUs but also AI developers. And to bring all that together, they're calling for a national body, which they're calling the National Artificial Intelligence Authority. They haven't sort of said what they want, how they want that to be comprised, but as you know, we already have, as part of this Federal Science Department and a National Artificial Intelligence Agency. So I think perhaps reading between the lines, what the ACT might be pushing for is a body that might bring players from unions, businesses, academia, government. We'll have to see, but interesting stuff.
Yeah, there's so much happening in this space. And Adam, in terms of what any individual unions that we're starting to see are pushing in this space, can you give our listeners a bit of an insight there?
Yeah, sure. So a few that I'm aware of, for the MEU, that for some time now there's been automation in the mining industry. The MEU, unsurprisingly, although embracing automation, as they say, they want workers to be safe, and they want the technology to benefit them too. The TWU, they're concerned about the implementation of driverless technology, which, as you know, is becoming increasingly used at a rapid pace. The CPSU, interestingly, sees great potential to aid efficiency in government by using AI, but unsurprisingly is warning against it replacing humans. And perhaps picking up your point on the Hollywood writers, the MEAA is concerned about AI stealing creative works, wants IP protected and workers consulted where IP is used in their sector. I think also one point I'd like to make here is you had involvement with HSF's Future of Work report, as you know, as in many of our team, last year. And a finding there that was interesting is that compared to 2021, in 2023, the number of employers who are anticipating disputes relating to AI with their workers has gone down significantly. So I wonder if that sort of indicates perhaps that employers might be underestimating, the risks of disputes here, against that backdrop of what we just mentioned with the ACTU. I mean, I don't know. But maybe they are. I mean, and maybe businesses are focused on embracing the technology, like you and I are still grappling with what it means, and perhaps less focused on the risks. So again, one to watch.
I think that's right, Adam. So when speaking to clients about the use of generative AI in their businesses, there's a couple of extremes, I suppose. So I guess there's people where I'd put myself in that category that are curious, understands it's important to develop and have a strategy and use case for and experimenting in that. And there's others that are like, not relevant for my business at all. Not relevant for my business. We make widgets, we drive trucks, we do whatever it is. And, if you just look at the statistics, I read a quite significant report that had been conducted by Goldman Sachs. It was produced last year. But the findings showed that something like 300 million full-time equivalent jobs will be completely done away with.
That's
by
massive.
the use of it, isn't it? It's completely done away with through the use of generative AI. So we needn't and we should not be doom and gloom about this. So the use of Gen AI can be used by businesses and by workers in a few ways. And they're described broadly as automation, so that is replacing humans. replacing the job that a human has done with a machine doing that job. Again, that is not a concept that is new. For very many years, automation in distribution centres, in manufacturing processes, that has been the case. It is just moving in different economies and work spaces than we've had previously. Mm-hmm. And the other aspect is augmentation. So that is enhancing the jobs of humans, because we know if you've ever had a play around with ChatGPT or Copilot or any of the tools, it gets it wrong sometimes, right?
Yep.
It gets it wrong. So there is a piece about the need for humans to still do that job, but to enhance and to create more efficiencies in that space. Another area that we're starting to see businesses explore is the use of AI to assist decision making. But we'll talk about this in a bit more detail, and I think this is a really interesting space. But the risk associated with that in businesses from incorrect algorithms, decision-making processes leading to biases or, quite frankly, the wrong judgment. So things like recruitment, selection for redundancies, there's a few areas in that space where there might be technologies that can assist to create a shortlist. So, I mean, looking at that at a macro level, then what can we anticipate to see in terms of demands, and what are we starting to see? So one thematic I think that's really important arising out of all this, given those statistics that I just shared before, is the impact on job security. Now, I've used that word deliberately, of course, because that is a thematic that has been honed on by the current government and is the whole basis of the raft of recent legislative reforms that we've had in this space with respect to secure jobs, better pay reforms and the like. This is, we know, going to impact the jobs of some Australians. And so from that, what we might anticipate is a range of claims from unions, from employees, relating to job protection. So absolute prohibitions on involuntary redundancy, pecking order claims for voluntary redundancy, enhanced redundancy entitlements and the like. One of the points, Adam, that I thought was really interesting that had come out of the ACTU Congress report that you mentioned was the concept of shared benefits. Now, what that might translate to, and we're already starting to see some businesses play in this space, is moving to a 4-day working week, for example. You still get paid as a full-time employee, but the use of assistive technologies to make humans do their jobs more efficient. The union movement is saying, well, that employees should have the benefit of that and get to spend a bit more time at home in their personal pursuits. So that will be really interesting to see how the productivity enhancements that arise out of this technology will be shared and can be shared with employees. We spoke about some of the limitations on the decision-making process, and I think what that might lead to is a push for from employees and unions for increased transparency. So we've seen that in, the Hollywood Writers Guild example that we gave and some of the specific Australian union examples. So it's consultation and transparency about the use of Gen AI. When are they being used to select people or make decisions for certain projects and the like? There's an interesting space, and I'm desperate for this myself. How do you use this technology? Like, it is new. I'm not quite that old partner, sort of like hopeless with technology, but it's completely new. We're all learning how to use it, and the call and the push and the need for investment from businesses and from employees desirous to make sure that they remain relevant and that they can use their jobs to enhance their productivity rather than make them redundant, I think is a really important space. And it's one that I think, regardless of whether your workforce is unionised or not, indeed perhaps more the latter, there will be claims, demands and expectations from employees that they be provided with opportunities to test and be trained in these technologies. And that's a good thing, right? It will enhance the organisation's capability and capacity as well.
Agree. Training is such a critical part of the transition from both sides. Yeah.
Absolutely. You just see the way you prompt certain things, the slight wording, it really produces different answers and the usefulness and the utility of the results that are provided. There's another aspect, Adam, and it's in relation to the use of these technologies with respect to workplace management, workforce management. So rostering, leave absence requests, performance monitoring, for example, recruitment we've spoken about. So there really is room for the increased use or use in the first place for the technologies in this space. So with all those things that I've mentioned, there's opportunities, right? But of course, there's risks associated with that. And I do think it would be remiss. I think it would be remiss of listeners to assume that because they're in a certain industry or sector, that there won't be creep or demand upon them or some creative thinking in relation to how Gen AI will be used into their business. And so I wondered, Adam, if we can just have a chat about specifically bargaining, how this might play out in light of those capabilities from a bargaining lens.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is Inside AR after all, so we better
Yes.
hone in on bargaining. So, look, I mean, we're already seeing some of our clients grappling with claims, AI-related claims, and we're already seeing AI-specific terms in a number of enterprise agreements. As you quite rightly pointed out, automation in some industries is not new, and so there are clauses that, from a few years ago in enterprise agreements that are really quite relevant to this. I mean, dealing with the sorts of things we've been talking about, so consultation, privacy, and as you point out, it is seeming to be more relevant or more likely to pop up in certain occupations or certain industries. So administrative tasks, tasks requiring a lot of analysis, design tasks, customer service, and repetitive manual tasks, of course, are where we're seeing a lot of this pop up. Less likely in things like healthcare and education, at least for the time being. But I'm not going to say never. I'm sure there's lots of use cases in those industries too. So I think the key takeaway is, this is something that, especially if you're in those, dealing with those occupations or industries that are most likely to be affected, this is something that you should factor into your IR strategy.
Yeah.
Perhaps worthy of calling out a few specific examples that I've seen in approved enterprise agreements. One earlier this year in the journalistic industry, there is a consultation clause specifically about implementing AI technology where it would impact editorial operations. Now that's in addition to your normal major change consultation provision. This is an additional specific consultation clause that's gone into that agreement. Similarly, in an industry where driverless technology has been implemented, there's a clause where a consultative committee is required to be formed and used as the forum to discuss the implementation of AI and similar technologies. So there are two examples on sort of consultation rights.
Yeah.
But we're also seeing, as you touched on, clauses just outright prohibiting involuntary redundancies. So there's one in particular I've seen in the driverless technology space that's just prohibiting people being replaced by driverless technology. So, look, I mean, what do you do with this? If you're an employer and you're faced with a claim in bargaining for a specific consultation right, I mean, do you agree to it? Look, maybe you do. There's some interesting evidence the OECD published earlier this year or last year perhaps, which found interestingly, well, perhaps not interestingly, perhaps unsurprisingly, that employers that consult with employees about the use of AI technology, they're seeing notable productivity improvements. And perhaps that's not surprising. Okay, so you might have a consultation clause. What does the clause say? Does it say that you need to consult when you first implement the technology? Or does it require you to consult every time you might tweak the technology or there's a new iteration of it, which might be all the time. We see updates for our technology quite frequently. The drafting is going to be key to make sure that the clause is practical. What about transparency? If you get a request from employee reps for information sharing or more transparency about how the business is using AI technology, I mean, I think something that businesses need to consider is how much do they know about the technology that they're using when they're using it to make decisions in particular. Now, I'm not suggesting that any business should try and understand every single aspect of an algorithm, but if you're committing to sharing information about how AI is used, you don't have the details of the algorithm and the developer is not going to share it with you, might put you in a bit of trouble.
Yeah, and that I'll just delve into that a bit more because one of the the risks, I suppose, that you and I were kicking around when we were preparing for this episode was the use of AI in recruitment technologies and, you know, the algorithms that are used, for example, to put together a shortlist might knock out people based on certain words that they use in their cover letter. It might have a preference for certain people that live within a geographical area that might in turn directly or indirectly discriminate against certain groups of employees. Now, the code that is used to create the algorithm to reduce the masses to a shortlist, where it's cut out those candidates, that's created by someone who we don't know, what's in the operative mind of the coder in, you know, who knows where and when. So when we were talking about that accessorial liability and how do you know and what is it using, I think that's such a fascinating space, isn't it?
Oh, agreed. Yeah.
And one can only imagine. I mean, we don't want to be too dramatic about it, but you know, who would be the defendant to a claim like that? What is in the operative mind? Well, the operative mind is a machine that was created by a software engineer. So interesting, isn't it?
No, it is. I mean, I'm sure there'll be a lot more spoken about or written about this,
Yeah.
so watch this space.
Absolutely. So look, in terms of what else for the future, so you touched on this briefly when talking about the possibility for, or on the ACTU's wish list, potentially a relaxation in relation to permitted matters and what could be included within the scope of bargaining. Now, of course, we're coming up into an election cycle. We spoke about this broad concept of job security. Quite frankly, there has been no greater threat to the job security of Australians than the imposition or the advances in AI technology.
Good point.
And it might well be that if the ALP government is returned, it adopts many or some parts of the ACTU's wish list. That remains to be seen, but certainly from a thematic, it is absolutely on brand, I suppose, for there to be further legislative restrictions or tests in this space. So I think that'll be really interesting one to watch. And then, you know, the other thing we were reflecting on is what does it mean for bargaining and industrial relations and, you know, the long history that we've had in this country for, you know, the bargaining, the parry and thrust of bargaining, particularly in this new environment that we're in. So there's a couple of things, right, Adam? One is a union and a group of employees come along and say, under no circumstances are you permitted to make involuntary redundancies due to the implementation of this new technology. Presumably, that might not be a claim that could be palatably accepted by an employer when met with that in bargaining, and then we're off to, you know, intractable bargaining disputes and all that, and there's industrial action. So one can perceive without stretching the imagination too much that indeed it might create a bit more of impasse, I suppose, in this space. On the counter, who knows? And particularly in perhaps some industries or sectors, it might be said that nothing focuses the mind of employees than the threat or the prospect or the possibility even of job losses. So if there's 5 people doing a particular job and a machine's going to come along and means that there's only one of them to do that, you want to be that one employee, don't you? So perhaps it might lead to more productive workplaces and more office attendance and more discretionary effort being put in. Who knows? It really remains to be seen in that space. And I suppose the closing reflection that I have is this. This technology is advancing just so rapidly, isn't it? The technology and the way organisations are coming to understand how they can implement them and use them effectively, you know, for the benefit of all. It's just advancing so quickly. Bargaining does not, right? Bargaining does not. It takes forever and ever, and it is cyclical. And so I think, again, it would be remiss, or I suppose to flip it the other way, encourage you, if you are thinking and you are coming up to bargaining, as always with your strategy, to be curious about the terms and conditions. And even if it's not on the radar of your business in the coming, 3 to 6 months, it might well be in 2 years' time or 3 years' time that there has been technological advances not contemplated, and look at your agreement and say, well, actually, is this going to limit our ability to do A, B or C. So I suppose it is a reflection, even those that think, nah, this isn't us, I can't see it impacting us. I do wonder, in the world that we're in, the way things are moving so quickly, where it's better to be a bit more prepared in that space. Completely
agree, Nat. It would be not the ideal position to be naive and just think this is never going to affect you.
Well, this could, who knows, it could be our holographs doing this podcast on the next occasion.
There's some efficiency in that. Yeah.
We must confess, actually, that in preparing this, we did use some notes that we'd put together and did prompt, now what tool, we used a generative AI to turn this into a bit of a bullet point script for us to talk about Insider, and it does. It's just absolutely fascinating.
No, I agree completely. Yeah, it was good.
Very helpful, but let's hope that we won't be done away with, because I think there's a lot happening in this space, and the impact on bargaining in the coming few months and years. So we hope you found this episode useful. As always, we really welcome and value any feedback, comments, criticisms or anything like that. Please reach out to any of your HSF contacts through the usual methods. You can send us a message on LinkedIn, or we do have a dedicated email address, insideir@hsf.com. As always, thank you, Adam, for joining us on the couch. Lovely to have your insights. Thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to seeing you. You might perhaps a hologram of us on the next edition of Inside IR.